So, what a pleasure it is to have with us today the illustrious Professor Peter Seivewright. He is a concert pianist, a recording artist. He has toured the world and played with many esteemed orchestras. And it's such a thrill to have you, Professor Seivewright, here on the Learn Partimento podcast. And welcome to the show.
No, I'm absolutely delighted to be here. And my biggest congratulations on your Partimento program, because I've often wondered, I taught for 24 years at the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama. And then, in fact, after that, I subsequently became Professor of Music at the Academy for the Performing Arts at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, Professor of Music at the Academy for the Performing Arts at the University of Trinidad and Tobago for 3 years, 2008 to 2011. But my principal duty when I taught at the Academy was I'm also a jazz pianist, as I think you know.
Yes.
Although, as I always say, first, foremost, and always a straight classical concert pianist. But I am also a jazz pianist. And I spent a lot of time when I taught at the Academy in Glasgow teaching the the classical piano students jazz piano. Now, some of them had done jazz piano before, but many of them had not. And so I introduced them, to a range of techniques, the notation used. And without exception, they all said that they greatly valued it because they felt not only for its own sake, and I mean, these are very good students, top class conservatoire.
Right.
And they all, they said they felt it gave them a freedom that their playing didn't have before, and the confidence that they could improvise and get a solo going and so on. And I think the Partimento thing has a very similar function, I think. And also the reason I'm very keen on Partimento is because
Is it a term that you've heard before? Because I know you're familiar with the 18th century, so I was wondering if that's a term you might have heard being thrown around.
Oh, sure, yeah. No, I mean, I knew what it meant. Although I admit I have done a bit of boning up in the last couple of days. But I was well familiar with the phenomenon, and when well familiar with the technique that was used in the 18th century. And now, as you know, I play repertoire from all periods, from going right back to a particular interest in the Welsh. He always described as an English composer. In fact, he is Welsh. The Welsh composer John Bull from the 16th century. And I've performed quite a lot of his music, including what I consider to be his great masterpiece, the Walsingham Variations. And so I go right back. And also, as you know, I've premiered a lot of modern works. I think I've had 20 or
unfortunately,
30.
they put him as an English composer, as you can see. But he's Welsh, as you're correcting the record.
Yes, Welsh, yeah. I was born in Wales, yeah. Sorry,
okay.
that's... As you know, I'm Scottish. It's a bit of a Scottish thing. Everyone in the United Kingdom gets called English. In fact, I'm a Scotsman, but I was born in England. But anyway, never mind about that. But no, I was well familiar with it, and I've always wondered why it was not taught in conservatories. To the best of my knowledge, it isn't taught in any of the British conservatories, and I know I've listened to your previous speakers. I think there are people introducing Partimento programs in the United States now. But it's always struck me as strange that it wasn't taught, because although I perform music from all periods, my absolutely ultimate love is the mid-18th century, Bach, the late Baroque,
yes,
and going just where it goes into one of my unfavorite terms used by music historians is the pre-classical period. I always hate that. I know it sounds so trivial. It sounds like a pre-dinner drink or or something, just as a warm up. And I mean, sorry, I'll just
Is that
expostulate.
referring to people like CPE Bach
Yeah,
and
indeed it is. But
yeah,
it's ridiculous to call it the pre-classical era because, first of all, the younger Bachs, as I think they're called now, it's sort of political correctness thing,
right.
C.P.E. Bach and J.C. Bach, Galuppi, all the composers of that era, they didn't know, it's silly to call it a pre-classical period because they didn't know that Mozart was just round the corner. And if you look at the music, as I'm sure you know, I'm talking to a period of music on which you're extremely expert. But if you look at that period of music, if you look at the period of music from about 1730 to 1780, say, roughly about the time of Galuppi's death, there is no period in the history of music where music could have gone in so many different directions, with the sole exception of the 1960s, where experiment was the norm. But in that period, the later part of J.S. Bach's life and the working life of Galuppi, Johann Christian Bach, C.P.E. Bach, and so on, it's the most extraordinarily experimental period of music. Music could have gone in so many different ways. To sort of call it pre-classical, it's just absolutely no. It's like calling Stockhausen pre-minimalist or something like that. It makes no sense, And anyway, that's my that's one of my real
could there be
hobby
a
horse.
sense, Professor Seivewright, that there is perhaps and I don't believe this at all, but a lack of genius because you have Bach and Mozart at two bookends, and everyone else is just chopped liver.
No, well, that was the thinking. I think very much but I think personally, I think that's a very outmoded way of thinking. And I'm happy to say that a lot of the reviewers, of course, I want all the reviewers to say how beautifully it's played, etc., etc. And the reviews have been very good. But
Yes.
I'm very pleased that many of the reviewers have said, why on earth don't we know Galuppi? Why, Peter Seivewright and now others. I think I was the first. Well, I was the first, but now others. There are more recordings of his operas and orchestral music, and I think there has been this tendency, and even with the younger Bach composers, they wrote some absolute masterpieces, and yet they're the sons of Bach. Well, I mean, J.S. Bach was the son of Ambrosius Bach. So what? And I think there has been that kind of thinking. But I'm happy to say, and the CD industry has done so much. Nobody loves giving concerts more than I do. But my ultimate work is recording. My life's work. I mean, so is concerts, but my absolute life's work. I intend to live to be 157, but my legacy will be. No, I'm quite serious about that. I'm teetotal and all the rest of it. Anyway,
Well, that's so you said a recording artist, because I do know you are a very prolific concert performer as well, a recital performer.
Indeed, yeah.
But you just mentioned that recording is that your first love?
Recording is my absolute passion because
Why is that?
Because I feel that I record works when I've been playing them for many years, and Stephen Sutton, the chief executive of the Divine Art Recording Company, is the greatest chap you could ever meet. He's the best person I've met in the entire recording industry. That will probably give me some nasty phone calls from some of the other labels I've recorded for, but never mind. No, I mean, I was absolutely thrilled. For example, I recorded the complete piano music by Carl Nielsen, the Danish music for Naxos, and I couldn't be pleased. And Naxos were great to work with.
Right.
But Stephen Sutton, he's so accommodating, and I know that, and I'm trying to, but I know that he would like to get me to record a bit quicker. And I'm always saying to them, oh, I want to give it one more concert performance, one more, and then I'm ready. And anyway, he's very kind and very obliging. But I was just going to say, I do very active as a concert artist, of course, and but I was going to say my absolute ultimate love in music is the mid 18th century. That's my cornerstone.
Why is
Bach,
that?
obviously. I don't know. I think, and this is why Partimento is so great, in my opinion. I'm just talking about my personal temperament, really. But in my opinion, I don't actually like the term language of music. People say that as if but anyway, let's use it. It's not, music has nothing to do with speech, really, but it's not a term I like, but let's use that. But the music idiom of Albinoni, Bach, CPE Bach, Galuppi, so many, D'Alberti, Manfredini, in my opinion, the whole question of musical idiom achieved a kind of perfection that has never been achieved before or since. The only possible time it has been achieved otherwise, in my opinion, is in the late 16th century. For example, Palestrina. He achieved a perfection of who is one of my great heroes, who lived centuries before the piano, but he's one of my absolute top composers. And he achieved a perfection of musical language. But I think the mid-18th century, particularly Bach, Albinoni, and so on, I was saying what an experimental period it is as you move on. But I think especially the Italian composers of that era achieved a sort of perfection of musical idiom that has never been achieved since. For example, I love Mahler's symphonies, but it's great, but you couldn't say it has a perfection of musical idiom in the same way that, you're listening to Mahler and great, and all of a sudden you get a 6 forte organ chord or a very tiny bit of triangle or something like that. It's full of surprises, and that's good too. I love that too. But for pure perfection of idiom, I think the mid 18th century, I always think particularly Bach and Albinoni, I think, that all those oboe concertos and so on, I think it achieved a perfection of musical idiom that has never been achieved by anyone else, with the possible exception of Palestrina. And this is why I think Partimento is so good, because it familiarizes the students with that idiom in a way that nothing else can do. It's a bit like, as I was saying, teaching jazz piano. It gives the students, a whole new insight. And as I say, when I taught the jazz piano in Glasgow, many of the students had studied jazz before and were familiar with the idiom, as listeners. They knew their Duke Ellington. And of course, when I was professor of music at the Academy for the Performing Arts at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, professor of music at the Academy for the Performing Arts at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, they all knew the jazz idiom. They had it going around with them all the time. But I think the whole thing of actually composing music is a very, very creative thing for performers. For example, I've written my own cadenzas. I'm not a composer, but I've written my own cadenzas for the Gould
That is
piano.
unusual, right? Because for concert pianists, you don't usually see that in the 20th century and the 21st century by extension. You do not see classical concert pianists writing their own and performing their own cadenzas. It's almost taken for granted that they're going to perform a cadenza written down by one of the great composers.
Yeah. Well, the truth is, there are, for example, for the Mozart piano concertos, if you're going to write a new cadenza, it's going to have to be extremely good to match the ones that already exist. But I did root out a few cadenzas that people have written for the Galuppi piano concertos, Won't mention any names, but to be honest, I thought I can do a lot better than that. So I wrote my own. No names, no pack drill. Slightly different for the Mozart concertos because, as I say, there are so many good ones. Well, I'm not by any means a Mozart specialist, but far from it. But when I have performed Mozart concertos, I've always used cadenzas that already exist.
Can I ask you about your evolution in your interpretation from when you were a younger man to today? Have you seen yourself change in the way that you approach the piano, or did you have a conception when you were young and it hasn't really changed?
I think I'm closer to the second of those two options. My sole piano teacher, Richard Baxt, great Polish pianist and one of the greatest, most legendary piano teachers there has ever been. I studied for 8 years, from the ages of 22 to nearly 30. And he instilled in me, I don't mean that he brainwashed me, but he developed who I am. And I think I could honestly say that my essential attitude to playing the piano has not changed a great deal since I was 30. Now I'm now 67, and life has never been better. What I think, where there have been, I don't so much like the word changes. I prefer the word evolution. Where there has, I think, been considerable amount of evolution, my great passion after music, well, actually, I have two great passions. As I think you know from correspondence, I'm a fanatically keen sea swimmer, and that's a huge thing with me, actually, just like golfing. But anyway, but we'll pass on that. It's although of course it was great when I was in Venice, looking up the Galuppi manuscripts. I was in the sea every day. Mind you, you're always in the sea in Venice, aren't you? So they never get out of it. Anyway, but my great passion, intellectual passion after music, is philosophy. I've been hugely interested in philosophy since I was about 12 years old, and over the years I've read. I have no formal training in philosophy at all, but I have read, by any standards, quite a lot of philosophy, and I think my evolving understanding of the world must surely be reflected in my playing, even if I'm not conscious of it. And I think I'm talking to you. You are currently in Singapore, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, as you've probably worked out from my biography, I have a huge passion for Asia, and I've played a lot around in Asia, in India, and so on. And in recent years, I'm always sometimes a bit hesitant to talk about this because, it's just a slight aside here. For many years in the earlier part of this, in the last century and the present century, there was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom called Tony Blair, who, as a matter of fact, I didn't know him, but he was an exact contemporary of mine at Oxford. And I didn't know him at all. But I was never at all in sympathy with his politics. I'm essentially very much conservative and a capitalist, and he was a Labour Prime Minister. But I find that so many people that you find yourself essentially at variance with, they'll occasionally say one or two things that is just perfect. You think, hey, I just couldn't, that's so right. Tony Blair became a Roman Catholic when he was in his early 50s. And an interviewer asked him, when he became a Roman Catholic, they said, we understand this is a personal, very respectful actually, a personal matter, Mr. Blair, but it's a bit of a surprise to us because you've never talked about it at all. And he gave the most perfect response. He said, "No, I haven't." He said, "In the United Kingdom, as soon as you talk about anything spiritual or religious, people look at you as if you're some sort of nutcase." And it's perfectly true. The moment you start talking about any form of spirituality, I would never describe myself as a religious person, although I am partly Jewish. But when I said I'm a bit hesitant to mention this, over the last 15 years, I have read a lot of Asian philosophy, Indian philosophy, Hindu philosophy, and I think that has greatly changed my. Well, no, again, I don't like the word change. That has greatly developed or amplified my view of the world, and I think it must be expressed in my playing, although I don't know how. But that's a very long answer to a very short question. But I think any alteration or evolution in my piano playing has been more connected with my own personal development rather than anything specifically musical.
That is very
I mean,
interesting.
for example,
I understand what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, two of my absolute pianistic heroes when I was 30 were Glenn Gould and Rudolf Serkin. Now, two of my great pianistic heroes, now I'm 67, are Glenn Gould and Rudolf Serkin. And what I like to listen to and what I aspire for, I hope, one never knows, I hope I'm getting closer to what I aspire to. But
this is a very serious interview, and yet I have an aside that since you brought it up, I am a fan of British sitcoms. I don't know. Do you?
Oh yes.
Have you ever seen? I'm asking a British person this, so maybe this is a silly question, but I'm a huge fan of Yes Minister. I think it's a tremendous sitcom. I don't know if you like it, but
it is. It is. The first thing I should say is that I don't own a television receiving set, and nothing would persuade me ever to own a television receiving set. But I have seen it, and as many prime ministers, it was probably me talking about Tony Blair, have mentioned. He was one, the late Baroness Thatcher was another, and they all said, for us, for everyone else, this is a comedy. They said, for us politicians, it's a documentary. The events like that happened every day.
Well, they did have a mole, what was later revealed, I think.
Oh yes, I'm sure they did. Yeah, but I think it was immensely popular because I think it reinforced in British people exactly what we suspected political life was, and and it was said both the late Baroness Thatcher and Tony Blair. They both said exactly the same thing. For the general audience, it may be hilarious. For us, it's what happens every day.
I want to bring it back to you mentioned your two heroes. Can you explain why you like Glenn Gould and why you like Rudolf Serkin? And especially for young pianists who might not have heard of those two.
No, probably not.
Why are those two special to you?
Glenn Gould was always a top pianist of mine from a very young age. The first thing is that he was a very, very early advocate of recording, as you know. And indeed, although personally, it's not for me to judge what he does, personally, I think he made an error. Because if I'm allowed to say that, I'll have the Glenn Gould estate onto me now. But he decided only to record, that he wouldn't give concerts. Now, all I can say is I would never do that because I love playing to people. I love playing to an audience. And also the number. I think the more times you play a piece of music, the better you get to know it, and the better recording you can make. You give it 6 or 7 performances before, before you record it, and then you've really got something, worth recording. And so he was an early advocate recording, but I I was always a huge fan of his Bach playing. Now, as with any very controversial pianist like Glenn Gould, and of course it may well be that some younger music students and pianists are not as familiar with his work as I am. He lived from 1934 to 1984. He only lived to be 50, had a massive stroke, unfortunately, and died at the age of 50. Very tragic. But I regarded his Bach playing as absolutely stupendous. Now, I have to add a slight caveat here. He was, as everyone knows, a very eccentric character. And there were times in his life when this spilled over into mental illness. There's no question of that. It's been well documented. And I have to say, not all of his recordings, mind you, you could probably say this about anyone, but not all of his recordings are as great as his best recordings. I should say, I'm just about to issue a recording of J.S. Bach's Goldberg variations. And perhaps Stephen Sutton won't like me saying this. I was going to say Glenn Gould's Goldberg variations, to this day, it's unrivaled. And I'm completely uncompetitive.
Are you referring to his first? Because he recorded 2 sets.
Yes, he did. Personally, I much prefer the second. Sorry, you're quite right. I should have made that clear. I think the second is incomparably better from my point of view, and as he thought. Now, there was a pianist who changed a lot. And he said, I think he was very financially minded, Gould, and I think he liked the royalties. But in his later life, he said, I wish I could destroy every copy of my first Goldberg variations. He really grew to detest it. And I think his second one is incomparably better. 1982, I think it is. And but he was. There were times in his life when his extremely well, I don't like the word eccentric, extremely individualistic, idiosyncratic personality did spill over into mental illness. And I must say, a few years ago, as you probably know, I recorded 4 Bach piano concertos, J.S. Bach, with the Scottish Baroque soloists. And I have to say, I listened to Gould's recordings a lot. I can't get with them at all, his Bach concertos. I just can't with them. By far, that's fine. What I intend is a matter of interest. People have this idea that pianists listen to pianists all the time, but it's not the case. A musician, one of today's musicians, whom I couldn't admire more, is the violinist Hilary Hahn, who is from the United States. As a matter of fact, she has 4 British grandparents. So and she is very proud of her British heritage. She said, I'm not really like the other American musicians, and she's, so we've adopted her a little bit. And I think she is perhaps, oh yeah, gosh, you're such a technocrat. You've got everything. That's, I think her Bach, I think I would go as far as to say that her Bach violin concertos are the best there have ever been. There have none better. So I was, anyway, that's all by way of saying what we're on. Oh yes, Gould. And so not all Gould's recordings are great, but his greatest are very great. Ronald Serkin comes second after Gould with me. Everyone knows he was a very great pianist. I think one of the great things about Serkin, incidentally, I should also add perhaps to those two, Emil Gilels, who, as I've gone on over the years, has become, again, one of my superheroes, particularly in Russian music. Serkin, I think, had an integrity that I always say that a great musician, perhaps I shouldn't be saying what a great musician needs, but if I think all the great musicians have what I call the 4 I qualities. They have intelligence, integrity, inspiration, and insight. I think that just about sums it up. I wrote, you'll be aware that very tragically, the great United States conductor Michael Morgan, the conductor of the Oakland Symphony Orchestra in California, died just a week ago. And I found myself writing a short obituary. And I said that I never worked with him, unfortunately, but I said he was a musician who exemplified those four qualities: intelligence, integrity, inspiration, and insight. And had all those four qualities in spades. Oh, you're not supposed to say in spades, I know. Anyway, never mind. Right. Anyway, he had all those qualities. And I think Serkin is like that. Again, I think, like all pianists, Serkin was stronger in some repertoire than his others, but at his best, he had what I call a line. He started at the beginning, and it went right through to the end. However long the piece was, if it was a Beethoven sonata or something like that, he started at the beginning, straight through, no interruption to the flow, the continuity, the musical thought. And that particular ability, in my opinion, don't want to sound in any way superior, but it's not quite as common as some people think, in my opinion. And Emil Gilels, I think, in the Russian repertoire is almost unsurpassable. So those are probably my three.
Can I ask you about something?
Sorry, I was going to say, you say, have I changed? I've only come to realize Gilels' greatness, really, in the last 10 or 15, his super greatness in the last 10 or 15 years. A prominent piano teacher in Edinburgh, a very fine woman called Margaret Murray MacLeod. She was always a great Gilels person. And she was always saying, she'd come to a recital I gave, Peter, it was great, but you need to listen to more Gilels. You need to listen to more Gilels. And I did, because she's a very, very expert piano tuition, married to a very fine composer, whose music I've also recorded, John MacLeod. And really thanks to Margaret, I got into Gilels in a big way. And for Russian music, I think he's the best of the best. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I just wanted to ask, first, how you got into jazz piano and how you have that creative side to you, and how do you tap into that, and what propelled you to add that side of creativity into your music career?
Well, if I can say this, you've asked completely the wrong question. Anyone, and I mean this, and I'm absolutely adamant about this, anyone who is a classical concert pianist and a jazz pianist, you have to be a jazz pianist first. You have to go naturally into jazz. In my case, my dad was a church musician. He was the organist at the Master of the Music was his title at the small Episcopal Cathedral in Carlisle, which is just below the Scottish border. And he was the only professional musician in the small town of Carlisle at that time. And a local jazz musician died. I don't think the jazz musician was a professional musician, but he was very fond of jazz. He died, and because my dad was the only, that's in Singapore, I think, because my dad was the only professional musician in the small town of Carlisle, he bequeathed his collection of it'd be over 150 jazz records to my dad. So he inherited these from someone he didn't know. He didn't know who this person was, but he just thought my dad was he conducted local choirs, and he's the only person. So anyway, quite unbeknown to him, that benefactor absolutely changed my life. I didn't know anything about jazz or what jazz was. I would have been about 8 at the time. But I just picked one of these LPs, as they were in those days. I was born in 1954, so this would be about 1962. And it was Kid Ory, great, unsurpassable jazz musician. And I put this on. That was me. Jazz was the only, well, you can multitask as well, which most men can't. That was me. I was just absolutely hooked. And I went through the entire collection of 150 CDs and got an encyclopedia. Frankly, I mean, it sounds a bit immodest, but I did get through that. An encyclopedic knowledge of the jazz repertoire at a young age. And of course, I had a good music ear, so I could copy it. And so I was improvising as a jazz pianist. By the time I was 8 or 9, it came very, very naturally to me. And that was it. My dad, as I say, he was the Master of the Music was his title. He was the organist at Carlisle Cathedral. I mean, organ music, choral music. Oh, stuff that. I couldn't, no interest at all. Horrible sort of stuffy church stuff. I wanted the real stuff. I wanted jazz. I wanted Kid Ory, Duke Ellington, and all these marvelous people. Now, in due course, I moved on into classical music, and my sort of bridge into classical music was Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, which remains the piano concerto I've performed. I think I've performed it over 30 times with professional orchestras, because people know I'm a jazz musician, so I often get asked to play the Gershwin concerto and Rhapsody in Blue, which is great, love it. And but I moved on. I heard jazz. I got Rhapsody in Blue, and I thought, that's written down. There must be some interesting music that's written down, and so on. And I didn't actually have a formal piano lesson until I was 14, when a very excellent woman moved into the small town where I lived and offered to teach me for free. And she introduced me to Beethoven and to Bach and so on. So. But until that was when I began. I didn't begin as a classical pianist till I was 14. I'd been a jazz pianist for about 6 years. So I'm very, very much a jazz musician turned classical musician, not the other way around. And I'm going to make a very bold statement here. Any pianists who are listening, I was very happy to teach jazz piano, as you know, both at Royal Scottish Academy of Music and when I was Professor of Music at the Academy for the Performing Arts at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, Professor of Music at the Academy for the Performing Arts at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm pleased to say that, many of my students in Glasgow, they did become, adept at jazz. They could improvise. They knew the repertoire. They could read the chord symbols and so on. But if you're going to be a professional jazz pianist, it has to be what you did first. It has to be your first love, in my opinion. So I'm very much the other way around. People do say, I don't think they necessarily mean it as a compliment, but I don't think they mean it as an insult. I have often been told that my classical playing has echoes of being a jazz pianist in it. That probably isn't, in fact, I'm sure it's not at all suitable for Beethoven, but I am who I am. And again, this brings us back right round to square one. This is why Partimento is so good.
Right.
Because it will familiarize the students with the 18th century in a way that nothing else can.
what I found so fascinating about the 18th century is a lot of the musicians there learned in a similar way to how you learned. Ear, they learned with their ear, and
Yeah.
they it was an oral tradition, and they loved the music, and it wasn't so much kind of. I mean, you're from the UK, from Britain. You know about music exams and graded exams, and there's a certain. It's very popular here in Singapore, and unfortunately, I would have to say a lot of people who learn classical piano, it's very much derived from the score only, and
I know.
and maybe we can step off from that point.
Well, I couldn't agree more because now, obviously, if you're going to be a classical concert pianist, the first thing you have to be able to do is read staff
Oh, no
notation.
question. No, no, they
No,
certainly
I know
did,
you're not.
and
I
they
know you're
certainly
not
do that in
disagreeing. But
Partimento
I
too.
think, that, yeah, but I think that, um, I mean, people often ask me why I haven't performed more classical chamber music. There are two reasons for this. I actually did form a very good a very, very good working relationship with a magnificent Russian violinist during the short period I was pianist in residence at the Phuket School of Music in Thailand, when I also played in Singapore, and so on. And Anna Konopliova, and if you're watching, hi Anna, because she was absolutely fantastic to work with. And she had the same idea as I had. She would turn up to a rehearsal. She knew the whole music. Now, again, no names. I have worked with a violinist who has led, yes, there she is, and I have worked with a violinist who has led several London orchestras. No names, no factorial here. He would turn up to a rehearsal. He hadn't the faintest idea how the piano part went. None. He knew nothing about oral listening, about oral learning, sorry, nothing. He could actually, to be perfectly honest, in the case of that particular individual, I have serious doubts about what he could hear in the first place. But yeah, just as well as no names. Get a libel
But
suit.
that's so
Anyway,
interesting, Professor Seivewright, that can happen. You can have a professional musician reach that
yeah,
height and yet have
indeed.
this. I guess we could say it's a big hole in the skill
It's a
set.
massive hole. Yeah, no, I think,
That would have
I
been
mean,
unheard of in the 18th century. That would have been unheard of.
well, of course it would. And it's also unheard of in amongst jazz musicians. If you turn up to play with a jazz combination that you haven't played with before, everybody has heard 500 versions of My Funny Valentine or whatever. And in rehearsals, you're constantly referring, oh, yeah, no, you got that from Miles Davis, didn't you? And all that sort of thing. That's how jazz, to be perfectly honest, I hope I don't do myself out of work here. Although my greatest love is playing the classical piano repertoire, I actually feel my natural temperament is more of a jazz musician in many ways. I feel in many ways more at home amongst jazz musicians.
Is that
And
perhaps that's why the 18th century is appealing
yeah, I think there is a link.
because they're kind
Yeah,
of like jazz musicians back then.
yeah. Well, let me tell you something. I'm as you know, Scottish, and my home is in stunningly beautiful Scottish countryside, just outside Glasgow. The organist of Glasgow Cathedral, where I have given many piano recitals and performed many Bach piano concertos with the Scottish Baroque soloists, is an Icelandic person, um, Frikkie Walker. And he's a very fine organist, choir trainer, all the rest of it. Now, his father is Iceland's best known jazz musician, is saxophonist. So maybe there is some kind of link. I don't know. And I say, but anyway, I think it probably is, and I do feel very at one with the 18th century generally, 18th century philosophy, the
Well,
counter enlightenment.
Professor Seivewright, I don't usually interview concert pianists or concert musicians ever, but the ones that I do interview tend to have that, well, they do have that ability to to think, well, I just think it's like being a real musician in the whole sense, someone who lives and breathes the music and then knows it inside and out, and they can communicate the language. And it's not something that it's like we were talking about that individual who could not hear the music. To me that sounds is almost absurd to be in that position.
Well, I should say I'm not saying he couldn't hear the music.
Yeah.
Although I have.
But I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying.
What I'm saying is
there was a mode of listening that he was not tuned into.
He didn't understand that it was. As you say, I mean, this is a leader of London orchestras, and he didn't understand that if you're going to turn up to a rehearsal with a pianist, you know the whole piece. You don't just read your part, and go on like that. And I should say, incidentally, in that capacity, there are two reasons I haven't done more chamber music. That's one reason. The other thing, although of course I have played, I've used the score playing modern works. In general, to me, using the music, having the music in front of you when you're performing is a very unnatural and wrong thing to do. I'm a passionate believer in playing from memory, and at all times. I have played modern works from memory. Elliot Carter was astonished that I played his piano sonata from memory, and done I have done it, but I have, of course, used score. But in modern works. But in general, I'm a huge fan, and chamber music. There are actually string quartets who play from memory now. But on the whole, people, when they're doing chamber music, they never want to play from memory, and it's to me, it's just a bit unnatural. That's what I mean when I say I think my temperament is a bit, and I think there is. I mean, I'm very glad you've got on to me on this, because I think the whole thing of jazz improvising and Partimento, they're very, very closely related.
It's a good segue now, because you mentioned score on a stage. There is a video of you on Russia Today, where you are, I think, playing in Ukraine, I believe. And the only question I have about this is not so much that you're reading from a score, but
I've got the score.
I want to ask you about the scribbles on the sheet music, and it looks like you've really colored it out. So I want to know what do you think about when you are looking at a score? How do you analyze it for performance? What is your thought process? And it really looks like you've really circled some things here and put in chords. And
no, that's hang on. Let me get you the score I'm working on at the moment.
Okay.
Right. So because this is this is actually, a lot of it is to do with memorizing, because a lot of it I did, as you know, have an academic music training at Oxford, and I had the very, very great privilege. Now, this is here's the page I was working on 10 minutes before I started talking to you. Let's see if we can get that.
Okay.
Should I put it sideways?
Okay.
No, let's put it so you can read the music. Yeah.
Okay.
You see, every note is fingered.
Yes.
Every analysis and so on. Absolutely every note is fingered. Every note is fingered. It's analysed all the way through.
By analyzed, are you talking about?
I often go through four. Sorry, I was just going to say I often go through 4 or 5 different fingerings.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I must say,
do you have a system for fingering?
No, I'm very, very spontaneous this way, and I'm the first. I haven't when I say I sometimes often think I'm more naturally a jazz musician. That I'm not sure. I don't enjoy teaching classical piano at all, because I think, for one thing, I think I can say people will make what they like of this, but I think I am quite an individualistic player. Not least that comes from being a jazz pianist. And for example, fingering, I always say to a student on when I have taught classical piano, which isn't rare, but actually, I was saying when I was professor of music at the Academy for the Performing Arts at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, professor of music at the Academy for the Performing Arts at the University of Trinidad and Tobago.
I had one big. Professor Seivewright, I've noticed that you say the full title.
No, I can say it. No. Anyway, I had one.
Is there a story behind that?
No. Yeah, professor of music at the Academy for the Performing Arts at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. It's a very long title. Professor of music at the Academy for the Performing Arts at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Anyway, I had one very, very good student, and she was great, but she was always asking me about fingerings.
Yep.
She said, "What fingering?" She was a really good student, really good, and she's gone on to do well. And but she was, and I said, "I can't tell you. I'm not you. I don't have your hands. Your hands are a different."
And how big are your hands? Do you have a?
No, actually, I'm not. Scots are not a particularly tall race. I'm not particularly tall. I'm 5'10". What's that? 178 centimeters or something like that. And actually, for my build, I don't have particularly large hands. I can get a tenth. But actually, there's another thing about that. People think that. I mean, I'm not talking about professional musicians here. We all know something different. But there is a standard view amongst people generally that pianists should have long fingers. Now, that stems from the bust of Chopin's hand.
Yes.
Because Chopin had very long fingers. Yep. And there's this very romantic sort of kind of cast of Chopin's hand. And everyone looks at that and thinks, oh, there's Chopin, one of the great pianists ever. So you've got to have long fingers to play the piano. It's actually not true. It was a bit of a disadvantage. It can be a disadvantage. And what you actually want is a hand my shape, put it sideways, where it's about the same from there to there, sort of slightly shorter, stubbly fingers. But I haven't got a massive hand. But I always say to all students, I can't. Oh yes, there we are. Is that the Chopin one?
I think so.
I think it is. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's terribly sort of romanticized and all that sort of stuff. And but you'll in actual fact that isn't ideal. And you also notice on that. Actually, I'm pleased to see that. Have a look at it again, because you notice that's. He has, I mean, of course, he's one of the world's greatest players, blah, blah, blah. But look how much shorter his fifth finger is than his third finger. That isn't an advantage.
Yeah.
It's better to have them more even in length. I mean, everyone's fifth finger is shorter, pinky, as we call it in Scotland. And everyone's fifth finger is shorter than their third finger. But it's best to have short, slightly shorter. But anyway, you can't with finger. Say that this girl who I taught, and she was, and I say how I can't possibly tell you what fingers to use. I'm not you. You have to. I can suggest something.
Yeah.
But you may find it different, and also what fingering you use. It's partly dependent on your mind and the connection between your mind and the fingers and so on. And what may be, very good for some person is not good for another. And I've got I know that a lot of my fingerings are pretty unorthodox. And so, but I do go, as I say, at Oxford, I had the very great privilege of studying music analysis with both Professor Joseph Kerman and Robert Sherlock Johnson, the composer, and they absolutely fantastic. I mean, you just couldn't get better analytical training. And of course, that's another thing. I mean, and I think this is sometimes the case in Asia. I don't want to be too damning, but what people call the academic is a completely wrong term. But the sort of musical understanding side of music is often a bit weak, and people don't study analysis properly. And you have to be, how can you possibly memorize, a complex modern work if you can't analyze it? You can't. it's not enough to rely on just going through it.
And by
Again,
analysis, are you referring to the? I mean, there are many different ways to analyze in classical
there are.
harmony. You use thorough bass, Schenker, Roman numerals, function theory. Is there a particular thing that you
No,
like?
I was
Chord
very
symbols.
much. Yeah, I was very, very much brought up at Oxford with Joseph Kerman and Robert Sherlock Johnson in the Schenkerian mold. I didn't understand that was specifically Schenkerian at the time. I just thought it was music analysis, But no, I think I don't agree with everything Schenker says. He sometimes goes a bit over the top. Particularly, he once said there's no Joseph Kerman, who I think he died last year, quite recently. But I mean, what one of the most stupid things that Schenker says, he says there's no such thing as chord 7, which is absolutely ridiculous. He always sees it as an extension of chord 5, which just isn't true. I mean, it's just there is chord 7, and that's that.
So you're saying chord 7 is the diminished chord then on that seventh? If you
it is, yeah.
So he was
But
probably
in fact,
he is thinking of it as more as the figured bass, I suppose, right? The seventh is kind of like the same harmony as the fifth and the second degree.
Well, he thinks Schenker thinks that chord 7 is always an extension of chord 5, but it isn't. I'll tell you a very good example. It's easy, that situation is that theory is quickly disproved in one of the best known melodies in music of all time, which is the opening of Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto. And in fact, can I play the example?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Incidentally, one thing that doesn't come over either on an interview or in emails. This is not a sob story by any means at all. But just to tell you, I've only got half a right knee. I'm not in any way disabled or anything like that. But it was smashed in catastrophically when I was 12, and I was doing pretty well. But I can only walk. Not quite normal speed. So it take me half a minute, a little bit longer than other people.
Please.
No, it's okay. I'm always actually very upfront about this because I don't want people to think it's anything worse.
Yep.
It's just a tiny thing that I have to live with.
Let me get the score while you do that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Please. Now everyone's surprised. They say that but just can't walk quite as fast as other people. Yeah, Tchaikovsky. Now let's play the orchestra. Going to chord 7. There. 7, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1, and on. It cannot be analysed in any other way than chord 7. I'll just play it, more fluently now. I'll give you another example from the pop repertoire.
By the way, beautiful playing. I'm so glad that you're playing the piano.
No, that's just improvising. But now what's the trying to think of the title. I'm Getting Ready for Love. Tamla Motown. Okay. to C sharp minor. Now, that is chord 7 in E major. Of course, it's chord 2 in C sharp minor. But you could say that it's only chord 2 in C sharp minor and that it doesn't need to be analysed in E major. But quite clearly, it is a chord 7. And so I really haven't. I mean, it's perfectly possible. Indeed, I would think, as a certainty, Schenker was not completely familiar with the Tamla Motown repertoire. But nonetheless, that's the chord. But you have the score of the Tchaikovsky there.
Yes.
Can you bring up the chart? I'll show you which bar it is. Just to demolish the. Actually, it's a little bit on. Yeah, there we are. It's we can't. It's the 1, 2, 3. It's the 4th bar on that page. The 4th bar on that page. You just look at put the cursor over the A flat. Right. Okay. Come on. No, you just missed it. Back a little bit. First beat of the bar. That one. Yeah, okay. There you are. Now let's look. Actually, well, it wasn't intended to give a music analysis class, but whilst we're on it, let me show you that. Because if you go from the start of that page, you've got just the right page there. If you go from we're in D flat major. Now, the first from the D flat. Now, for example, that G flat. It's clearly an appoggiatura. It's a D flat major chord, chord 1. 4-3. It's a 4-3. Now let's go on to the next one. That chord is 7-7B. That's the chord, and because clearly the A flat is an appoggiatura. You cannot put it. Putting in that A flat. Clearly, the A flat is an appoggiatura, just as the G flat, a couple of bars earlier, is an appoggiatura. Now, you can't possibly analyze that as chord 5, because if you did, the A flat would be the root, and it would be a consonance, not a dissonance. So it's completely impossible to analyze as chord 5. So I always think that's the ultimate proof that the chord 7 exists. Some people, I think, I would consider this a very great cop-out. If you just put it up so we can see the contrabass part, you'll see that the lowest note is in fact other way. Yeah. So sorry, I meant down. You'll see, of course, that the bass note, contrabass, plays the E flat.
Yeah.
And some people, I would think this is a total cop-out, but some people would say that it's an added 6th chord based on and the root is in E flat. I think that's completely wrong. I think the root is definitely C.
Right. So that's an important.
And so therefore it can only be a chord 7.
And that is because my prior training was in jazz theory, and they talked about you might have heard of the fundamental bass versus thorough bass, and that kind of arguments between the two camps. And some people would say, some people, like for instance, some people like CPE Bach and Bach themselves, they talk about the rejection of Rameau's fundamental bass theories, and yet Rameau is also a very great composer, and there's no doubt. I think if we look at Tchaikovsky's practical harmony manual, he did certainly think of inversions. So did Mozart, maybe even teaching his lessons with Thomas Atwood. So there's certainly a lot of evidence for both camps in the way they discuss this in this topic.
There is. Incidentally, I can't resist. You just mentioned Rameau, who of course is a great composer.
Yep.
This is quite short, but I'm going to play you a piano transcription of a very short piece by Rameau. And I think this melody is absolutely divine. See what you think. The melody is Rameau. I filled it out a bit pianistically in the 19th century. But what about this for a beautiful melody?
That was beautiful.
Very roughly played, but what a melody, don't you think?
Oh,
I think that's
thank you so much for
absolutely
playing that.
haunted.
That was
No, not at all. I'm glad we got on this. I'll tell you how I came across that piece of music.
And first of all, what
Very
was
cool.
the name of it?
I think it's just called Minuet. It's in A minor, as I'm sure you get together. I think it's absolutely hauntingly beautiful, that. I've often played as a concert encore, and people say, what was that piece? That was very rough.
It was great.
Very, very rough performance. Very rough performance. It just, I was making it up. I was improvising, but the tune was there. And the
Minuet, okay.
I tell you how I got to know that piece very topically. I spent 3 months as professor in residence at the Afghanistan National Institute of Music in Kabul. And I've got an adventurous temperament, and people might say, we're looking at today's situation is not so good, but I firmly believe that Western classical music, I don't actually like this idea of music as a sort of social change and all that. I quickly get turned off about that. But I do think that music can do a lot to steer people away from, for example, Muslim extremism and all the rest of it. And a student brought that to a lesson, an Afghan student, the Afghan National Institute of Music in Kabul, and I was just besotted with the melody, and he got it. So anyway, I arranged it. I usually just improvise it, again, jazz musician, but I think it's just called Minuet in A minor or something like that. It appeared in one. He had it. It was in either, I can't remember which, either the Associated Board exam or a Trinity College of London exam, one of the two. But I think so. And sorry, playing the whole thing, but I think it's particularly haunting. Bach has a way with this as well. Particularly haunting when you go to the 6th degree in the minor scale at the start. And then, have you found it on the internet?
No, I don't know.
Oh no, sorry. I thought I heard you say I'd got it.
Did you say it was a minuet in A minor?
I think it's minuet. I can't remember. I mean, it is in 3. I think it's called minuet, but I'm not absolutely certain.
Did you improvise a whole bunch of notes?
That's it.
Okay,
that's the one.
Yeah, I was wondering.
You're such a techno buff. You found that? That's the one.
It's
I filled it out.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was doing a sort of Partimento, if you like.
Yeah, it was great. And I think, you said it was rough, but some other people might say that the fact that you did it spontaneously and you were thinking on the spot, there was something much more special, special than perhaps if you had really had a well-oiled rehearsal, and so maybe there's both sides to that opinion, and I think I really enjoyed the performance, I have to say.
That's the one. What is? Yeah, Minuet.
It's the first book, I think.
Well, get your students at Songbird onto that.
I have to say, Rameau, what a composer! What a composer!
Oh, incredible composer, Rameau, and he's a very, very interesting character, because I noticed. I mean, you've made a lot of this in your, your interviews with other people. He's really an Italian composer. He was French, but his music is. Like I always say, Elgar, the British composer, I mean, really, he's German. It's all from Schumann and Mendelssohn and all the rest of it. Oh, no, I mean, Schumann, Mendelssohn.
Right.
Some people say Dvorak. I don't hear so much Dvorak in Elgar, but they
say Mozart is one of the best Italian composers of all time.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say that. You took words out of my mouth there. Well, he is in terms of, opera and what have you. It's... he is.
Same with Haydn as well.
Yeah, I think it's actually I always have a huge chip on my shoulder about Haydn. Actually, I'll tell you why. Because I did my first academic degree at Oxford, right? Did all my piano studying later. Now, in my finals at Oxford, I got a first-class degree in medieval music history and a third in performance. Mind you, I was also, I got in my finals at Oxford, I got a first-class degree in medieval music history and a third in performance. Mind you, I was all screwed up. I couldn't play anything then. I was all screwed up. I couldn't play anything then. But anyway, there was coming back to the Italian thing, people say that Mozart is Italian in his operas, but of course he's Italian in so much else as well. He is one of the greatest Italian. But that's you want to. Well, it's not for me to tell you, you what to do with your students
No,
at Songbird.
no.
But if you can get them to fill out that Rameau, I'm
Yeah,
sure they'll like the music.
and ornamented.
Minuet,
Yeah.
minuet, name on.
Can
No,
you?
Rameau.
Oh,
Sorry.
I just wanted to say, could you have any advice on how to fill out, and what do you teach your students on how to ornament and add extra notes to a piece on the score?
Well, I haven't done. I've done it. The I've only done it in the context of jazz. I've done it exclusively in the context of jazz. Where, of course, the first thing, I mean, you study jazz theory, jazz harmony, and all the rest of it. The first thing you have to do is to, all the vocabulary, what a 13th chord is, and all the rest of it, and all that. And so you've generally got it. If it says, D13, well, if it says D, flat 13, flat 9, something like that, you know what notes are required, sort of thing. A little bit different. The Rameau, filling out the Rameau there was that's much more like the Partimento thing, although it's it's got the treble as well as the bass. I think what you really you simply have to understand what the suggested harmony is and fill it out accordingly.
Simple as that.
That's not a very full answer.
No, I like those. I like the direct. In fact, it's like reading an 18th century treatise. Sometimes it's just a very direct. This is this, and then that's that's it. Now we have these very thick textbooks that go on and on.
Yeah. I know the. Oh yeah, I know that there are some really duff stuff written about jazz theory. I can tell you.
It
just gets churned out in the United States.
That could be Professor Seivewright. That could be another huge interview, because I do have some concerns about the way jazz education is in music education, tertiary education. But do you have a quick comment on that?
Yeah, it's generally absolutely dire, in my opinion. they not put it too. Well, I tell you, I shouldn't really be specific because, of course, for example, Berkeley in the United States has a tremendous reputation of jazz. It's got some magnificent faculty people. They and all that sort of thing. But I was speaking to, I'm sure she wouldn't mind me quoting her here, a very fine musician, female musician, jazz pianist called Nikki Isles, who teaches at the University of Middlesex in London. And she was saying that she has, I'm sure she wouldn't mind me quoting this because she wasn't being rude or abusive or anything like that. But she said, and I take her what she says very seriously because she's very. But she was saying that there were classes at Berkeley where people were simply copying other solos and so on, and that's exactly what not to do. It's okay to be familiar with what Oscar Peterson does on this, and and all the rest of it, but you don't actually copy it. Have to tell you, there's in Asia. As you know, Asian students are very often extremely good mimics. If you play something and you play it in a particular way, they can all just like that. Now, that's all very good, although it's not the same as it actually coming from you, so to speak.
Yep.
But nonetheless, it's good. But in Glasgow, I had a very fine chap, a very exceptionally fine musician. He was a composer, but he wanted to study jazz piano. He's now a professor at the conservatory in Wuhan, actually, where the pandemic is reputed to have started. Anyway, he's I think he's from Wuhan. I think he's. I'm sure he would get a job anywhere he liked, but I think his father had some connection with the conservatory at Wuhan. Anyway, I don't know, but anyway, he's the senior professor of composition there, and if he is the senior, if his father was the principal, and so on. That's not the point. He'd marvelous chap. He'd get a job as senior professor in composition anywhere.
Right.
So any connections he may. I'm probably wrong on that. I'm just trying to remember what told me. But anyway, so I think he's had some connect, or was governor or something. Anyway, this chap, he was desperate to learn jazz piano because he liked jazz harmony and so on. So I took him through all the jazz theory, 13th chords, flat and ninth, blah, 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 this. However, what he wanted to do, typical composer, of course, I wanted, obviously, to show him the essential jazz harmony and so on, so that he could improvise on it, which, as a composer, I hoped he would have some feel of. What he actually wanted to do, and this is before the days of widespread internet, instant recording on phones and all that. What he actually did was bring a little tape recorder along, tape what I'd played, write it down, and then learn it. It's the complete reverse of what he was supposed to do. And he would come back and play, his copy of exactly what I'd played. Mm-hmm. And I'd say, no, man, you've got to, this is the complete, I know, he said, but I like the way you play. I want to play like that. Mm-hmm. Yes, but you don't get it because you're not learning. And so eventually, after about a year of tuition, he left with a repertoire of about 5 pieces, all of which were copies of me playing.
Oh, so he...
I mean, that was...
So
if it
it's
was,
like learning
so
5 full transcriptions of your performances.
Yeah, exactly. And which is a complete reverse of what you're supposed to do as a jazz pianist. And I couldn't get this through to him. But anyway, he seemed happy with that. He was just doing it for interest. He wasn't doing it for an exam or anything like that.
Right.
And
but I think Professor Seivewright, I think jazz musicians do underestimate when they're teaching jazz. They underestimate just the incredible amount of time and familiarity they have with the source material, and that they assume the student has that similar familiarity with it, and they can absorb it quickly. But it's actually it's a lot of time and listening and playing and going through your hands. It's not something you can quite pick up in a 10-minute masterclass. There's a lot of
I'm sure you're right.
classes.
I'm sure you're absolutely right. And I don't doubt that I was guilty on this.
But you did a full year of that. So that's a year is
you
can definitely learn a lot of things in a year.
No, but you're right. You're quite right. And in fact, you've just brought this home to me. I don't doubt that I was guilty for this, because owing to the fact that this chap had left my dad all these jazz records, mm-hmm. I essentially knew the jazz repertoire by the time I was 13. I knew all the standards, and I could improvise them on that. And no, you're quite right. And if people have been brought up, very, very much in the, exclusively in the classical tradition.
Oh, it's like an alien world.
It's a different way. Well, I bet you must find the same teaching Partimento, yeah? Because the students will say, "What, you mean I have to decide what notes to play?" But why isn't it written on the paper? I mean, am I correct?
Yes, very much so. I mean, that's Southeast Asia for sure when it comes to learning music. Definitely, everyone is oriented to these exams. They really want to get distinctions on these exams, and very fair credit to them if they do get distinctions. But that is their entire conception of the journey of music, and I think unfortunately that's kind of it's not. There's more to music than. I mean, it's wonderful to get a distinction, but surely there's more than just getting that piece of paper.
Well, it's funny you should get onto that, because I had, and I just happened to have a very brief email conversation with a woman I used to be, well, still am, I hope, extremely friendly with. Julian Leach, very fine violinist. She's now married and lives in Birmingham in England, and she founded the Scottish Baroque Soloists, with whom I recorded the Bach piano concertos, and we had a very long and successful professional relationship. Few storms on the personal side, but never mind. Anyway, that's the way it is. Anyway, we're in very good contact, and she is a very excellent person in every way. And she just put a post on Facebook saying, why did the Associated Board only do major and minor scales? And she's absolutely right. And they also only do scales in the same hand. Yeah, that's what Julian's with the Scottish Baroque Soloists. And for example, I mean, one of the first, it's also Messiaen's first mode of limited transposition. I'm just about to perform Le Baiser de l'Enfant Jesus from Regards de l'Enfant Jesus. One of the biggest jazz scales is the 8-note octatonic scale. You know, that's not in any exam syllabus. It may be. I mentioned Nikki Isles, the jazz tutor at the University of Middlesex. She did the jazz syllabus for the Associated Board, and it may well be that scale is in her jazz syllabus. I'm almost certain that it would be. But I mean, with scales in classical music, we've got to, a lot of Poulenc's music, for example, is bitonal. So why don't we perform? If you're talking, why don't we do one scale in one key and one scale in another key? All that sort of thing. There's a huge repertoire of music that has that kind of thing.
Right.
And I think, I remember I mentioned this point. I remember once giving a talk after I'd given a recital at the University of Western Australia. I talking to a group of music teachers in Perth, and I mentioned this to them in a big way, and apparently it was talked about a lot. I mean, it seems to be a completely natural thing. Do a chromatic in one hand, do the do a ascending melodic or something in the other hand. I mean, it's quite natural, and that's for so much of the 20th century repertoire. You've got to be able to think like that, and it also develops independent thinking.
Can I ask, to wrap up, I had just a couple more questions on the music education side. First is, how does one improve sight reading? What's your advice on using the metronome? And what's your opinion on piano competitions?
Right. The first thing is, I really think that sight reading is something that no one should ever do. I never do it. I was giving you my score that I've been working on today. Now, this is with all the marks and stuff. This may be something to do with me as a jazz musician, but I always go through a score in immense detail just with the score before I go anywhere near the piano. And so now it's a very different thing if you play an instrument that is one of the regular instruments in the symphony orchestra, because you have to be able to turn up to rehearsal and play the principal flute part perfectly first go through.
Right.
It's very different. But and actually I think that sight reading is a complete non-thing for me. And I think actually players of instruments which only play one note at a time, monodic instruments, are often very unimaginative about this. A pianist will often play 5, 6, even 8 notes at one time in every chord. So we have 8 times as much information to assimilate as somebody playing the flute or the violin. That isn't to underestimate. You've got to get with the intonation on the violin, the tone quality, and all the rest of it. That isn't to underestimate what violinists or flutists or anyone else have to do. But it's just saying it is that much more complicated. And of course, the other thing is that we don't have this magnificent thing that everyone else has of orchestral training. So pianists on the whole, and I'm actually very glad I'm a poor reader, because it's, and again, it probably stems from all my early playing being by ear and all the rest of it. But because I think I go through it with the score, read it again and again, analyze it.
Because you play some difficult stuff. You played the Elliott Carter piano sonata. You played Charles Ives.
Oh yeah.
So that's not.
Oh yeah. No, I've got big. So, but anyway, so that's on that sight reading. Now, what was the second question?
Metronome. What's your opinion on the metronome?
Well, I'm a great. Sorry, I'm just trying to put this. It's always the same. If there's a pause, it's because I'm trying to think how concisely. I mean, it's all. Ultimately, it has to come from you, inside you. I'm not the. I think if you're not. If you're not feeling the music, if you're not feeling the pulse, there's a problem, and nothing can really fix that. Actually, I have to say, I was horrified. I mentioned my dad was an organist, and he I have to say, I mean, he is of course now deceased, but he was not a concert performer. He was but he was saying he did make a recording, I think, back in the days of LPs, and I was absolutely horrified by this. Absolutely horrified that he took the that he reckoned he couldn't play a section of some piece strictly in time. Now, if you can't play it in time by the time you're making a recording, what on earth are you doing playing a recording? So I can't tell you how horrified I was. I thought this was just the worst kind of amateurism. The worst kind of amateurism is. So what he got, the organ is so loud, right, that I can't tell you how horrified I am to hear, how horrified I was to hear this. I just can't begin to express it. But he got a wee metronome, and wee, sort of Scottish for small.
Yes.
And actually, because the organ is so loud, right, he actually had the metronome going whilst he was making the recording. Now, to me, that is absolutely terrible. If you don't know, if you can't play, it's just the worst kind of rank amateurism that could ever be. That is the worst kind of rank amateurism that is the worst kind of rank amateurism that could ever be. Worst kind of rank amateurism worst kind of rank amateurism there could ever be. It really is worst kind of rank amateurism there could ever be. I mean, if you can't play it rhythmically by the time you're in the recording studio, you shouldn't be in the recording studio. Anyway, you see what I'm getting at, right? You're with me, yeah? You take my point.
Right.
Yeah, so, you see what I'm getting at, yeah?
Yeah.
You see what I'm getting at, yeah? You see what I'm getting at, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, sometimes it is possible. I don't really have strong feelings about it. I mean, sometimes it's, you can play slightly unrhythmically and you don't quite realize it. Actually, I'll tell you what my real opinion on the metronome is.
Please.
Singers should use it a lot more, because they are the worst for being unrhythmic. Just taking a breath and destroying the rhythm. Yeah, that's my real opinion on the metronome. I think I should use it more. Piano competitions, I have no strong feelings about either. You've actually asked me three
Widely
questions.
different, widely different questions.
Yeah, no, but as a matter of fact, there are three questions three things that I don't have strong feelings about any of the matters you asked about. The if people want to do them, they're fine. But I've never tried to. I've never wished to be a member of a competition juror, or never sought to develop my career in that way. I personally have no interest. So I must say, I quote, you'll be well familiar with the work of the English pianist Peter Donohoe, who was equal second. No first prize was awarded, so he was effectively first, but he was equal second in the Tchaikovsky piano competition in Moscow. Now, if there is one piano competition well worth winning, that's it. I mean, that's the greatest in the world. Piano, violin, cello, whatever. That's a fantastic achievement. I haven't seen Peter for many, many years, for decades. I used to know him quite well, but I haven't seen him for a very long time. But anyway, he was asked when he came back from winning, which is what he did, when he came back from winning the Tchaikovsky piano concerto, an interviewer asked him, he said, and this is a pretty brave thing to say when you've just won, the greatest competition in the world, the one competition that has absolutely, it's a fantastic currency. If you win the Tchaikovsky competition, that's just so good. Anyway, he was asked if he thought piano competitions were a good thing, or if he thought they were a necessary evil. And I thought this was pretty brave, having just won the Tchaikovsky competition. He said, piano competitions, there he is, Peter. Yes, he had red hair when I knew him. Mind you, I shouldn't talk. And it was pretty brave. The interviewer said, do you think piano competitions are a good thing, or are they a necessary evil? And he said, piano competitions are certainly not a good thing. They are certainly not necessary, but they certainly are evil. And I thought that was pretty brave for a 20-year-old pianist, just having one, so they're not a good thing. They are certainly not necessary, but they certainly are evil. I thought that was very, very courageous.
Right.
For a 28-year-old pianist who just won the Tchaikovsky competition. Yeah. On the subject, I'll tell you something else. Let me give you a story from my own experience. You mentioned I'd played in Ukraine. I actually haven't played in what is now Ukraine, in other words, West Ukraine. I've played in the Donetsk People's Republic, which is the part of Ukraine that is now under control of the Russian population. Right. And it's currently now an independent country, as I'm sure you're aware, and is, but I think ultimately they would like to withdraw from Russia. Now they would like to unite with Russia. Now, of course, West Ukraine and the Donetsk People's Republic, incidentally, I'm glad. I'm glad and also horrified that you've shown that, because that, to my, let myself down. It was actually a good performance, but I'm always telling people have a good laugh at me for this. I'm always telling people you cannot have the score in front of you when you are playing a piano concerto. Now, I think that was Rachmaninoff's fourth piano concerto. And there's me talking on Russia Today. But I confess that I did use the score, as you can see on that occasion. And I feel distinctly ashamed that I did, and I can only say that it's very rare. My dad had a good phrase. He said, "There are no excuses for anything ever. There are no excuses for anything ever." He'd been a schoolmaster, and he's one of his phrases. He said, "There are no excuses for anything ever. There are no excuses for anything ever." And there are really. But anyway, I did use the score on that occasion, and in Donetsk, I went to the conservatory, where I'm an honorary professor, and I heard some students play, and after that, they opened the floor to questions, and there were questions from the students and from the tutors. All the questions they weren't even, what do you think about piano competitions? Because piano competitions are such an intrinsic and immanent with an A, part of piano study in countries of the former Soviet Union. But they said, what age do you think piano competitions should start?
Right.
And all the questions were like this. What do you think? Do you think that piano competitions should include chamber music? And they were all about this. They were all about competitions, and they were all about age. And they all said, do you think that piano competitions are suitable for 7-year-olds?
Right.
Now, all this sort of stuff. Yeah, I imagine you could get this in Singapore as well, but you could get this in
like
Russia.
It's absolutely musical arms race in
performance.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I took all these questions, and also, of course, they said, what age did you have your first piano lesson? And I said 14. They didn't believe it, And anyway, I said, we got to the end of all these questions, and I said, "Can I ask a question now?" The principal, he said, "You can ask any questions you like." And I said, "Well, my question is that every question I have received today, and there were about 20, every question I have received has either been about age or about the process of piano competitions." And this included the questions from the teachers as well as the students. I said, every single question I have received today has been about age or about piano competitions. I said, tomorrow I'm giving a recital in the Art Donbass Art Gallery, where I am including music by the two Russian composers, Metner and Scriabin, who were born about the same time. Scriabin didn't live to be very old, but they're contemporaries, both Russian romantics. I said, I haven't received why has nobody asked me a question about music? Why has nobody asked me, for example, why has nobody said, you're playing Metner and Scriabin tomorrow? What differences do you see in their approach to composition? Why has nobody said, how do you feel that Metner and Scriabin relate to the Russian nationalists, such as Mussorgsky or Rimsky-Korsakov? I said, I haven't had a single question actually about music. I said, why is that? Absolute silence. I'm partly Jewish, so I could say that. It went down like a pork pie in a synagogue. Being partly Jewish, I'm allowed to use that expression. I said, there has not been a single question actually about music. Why not? Stunned silence. And I think that's, that
It's
is very
indicative
bad.
of the culture, I think, around classical music. It's performance
Well, I
oriented.
don't. Yeah, well, I know, but you've got to know. You've got to know what you're playing. You know, you can't know. Um, I mean, I don't doubt they had, very good music history professors and so on. But I thought that the mindset was was just terrible. It was, you know, I'm 7 years and 6 months old. Should I do a competition when I'm 8 years and 1 month old? You know, it's just, and of course it is an endemic thing
It is.
in Asia. You
Right.
can't. I mean, it really is. Everywhere I go. Actually, I say it's endemic. I should put a word in here for
It's a
a very, very
pandemic
good
in classical music.
endemic. Yeah. Well, no, I don't. I try and hope not. Of course, the thing is here in
Well,
Western Europe
I
and
do
Europe,
think it's changing within the last 2 decades, maybe with the rise
I
of
think
with improvisation in
yes, and
classical
also
music,
I think yeah, and
Partimento.
also I do. Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say that. I think that one thing that has done a lot of good. Now, I, of course, am very passionately committed to playing music from the 16th to 18th centuries on the modern grand piano, and I firmly believe in that and all the rest of it. But of course, a lot of people play now on.
Period
They try and
instruments. Yep.
reproduce. I mean, I think it's very misguided because I think that um, we're not their audience. We're not a 16th century audience. We're, philosophically, I mentioned my interest in philosophy. Um, Even if I think I'm very doubtful if it's possible. I don't think it is possible. But even if it were possible to reproduce exactly, say, the sound that people made playing viols in the 16th century, even if it were possible, I can't think. It's to me, I can't think that it could be possible. But even if it were possible, even if you recreate exactly the oral experience, you can't recreate the listening experience because we've listened to Gershwin, we've read Schopenhauer, we're familiar with Indian philosophy, all that sort of thing as listeners. So I can't see what the point is in trying to recreate the oral experience of a different period of music history when the listening experience, by definition, will be completely different. So I think, they call it historically informed performance. I call it philosophically uninformed performance. But anyway, that'll
Do you
guarantee
believe
enough.
that? Do you believe that we are on a path upward or forward, and we do not
Well, right, yeah.
revisit
Well,
the
however,
past?
what I was going to say is, although despite my reservations on that subject, it's what is marvelous now is that students and the listening public generally are much more familiar with music from an earlier era. And this is why you're able to teach Partimento music, effectively and with an understanding. Because, I mean, when, I'm 67, yes, this terrible phrase, when I was a boy, but I mean,
Mhm.
let's go back 55 years. Uh, you hardly ever got music in a concert program, in an instrumental concert program before Bach. It was almost unheard of. You might get, you know, very specialized choirs singing Palestrina or something like that.
Mhm.
But for all my reservations about the approach to performance, which are very great, nonetheless, the widespread, the much greater knowledge of music from an earlier period, I think, has hugely benefited. That's the benefit that you were talking about has
And
come
what
about because I think people are so much better informed.
and I think you have done really a tremendous service to music by recording all that you have recorded, but I want to single out as well the Galuppi CDs, because
Yeah.
this was a composer who have practically vanished. I mean, in history, it was a sort of Vivaldi-like figure, disappeared, and I think you have done some very important work to at least have people understand that this name exists, and he is of a very high quality and deserves to be listened, and is a
Well, I hope so.
wonderful
Let me
example of the 18th century.
Yes, and of course, the other thing that's so great about the era we live now is the technology and the ease which people, can buy CDs and all the rest of it. And actually, again, one of the huge, as I say, the no, again, when I was professor of music at the Academy for the Performing Arts at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, professor. When I was professor, let me get this right. When I was professor of music at the Academy for the Performing Arts at the University of Trinidad, when I was professor of music at the Academy for the Performing Arts at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, professor of music at the Academy for the Performing Arts at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. One of the huge problems, the students couldn't buy CDs because they, in many countries, it just isn't possible. But in most countries, of course, CDs are so much more available. Right. And the availability of CDs and technology, it's meant that people, or concert audiences and music students now are familiar with a far greater range of music than than in the past. Yeah. And
crazy would you consider that if somebody had heard a concert in the 18th century and walked away, that might have been the only time they would have heard that music in their life.
Yeah, and it may well be the case that composers such as Bach or Handel, they only heard perhaps one or two performances of their own works, and that's a great thing. But let me tell you how I came to. You're very involved in teaching, which I'm not now. But I mentioned that I got the Rameau from a student in Afghanistan.
Yes.
Similarly, a violin student at the Academy in Glasgow, she was doing a piano exam, and she was one of my jazz piano students. And you know how it is with students. Sometimes you can. It doesn't happen with every student, but sometimes you form a nice, a friendly personal relationship as well. And with some others you don't, because just the personal chemistry just doesn't happen to be there. But she had to do a piano exam. She was a violin student. And she just, I've got to do this piano exam, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, what are you playing? And she came to see me because she liked my jazz piano classes and all the rest of it. And she said, I've got to play this piece. It's I've never heard of the composer. She said it's Galuppi, And I said, well, play it to me. I hadn't heard of Galuppi either. And this would be something like 17 years ago from now, or something like that.
Okay.
And I hadn't. Oh no, it'd be a bit more than that. Must have been in the previous century. But anyway, and likewise, I was just absolutely spellbound by this. I think she had. It was the first Galuppi sonata on my previous. On my first. It's the first one on my first CD. I think Volume 1. And it's A minor. I think, have I got that right? It's the first one in A minor.
The Larghetto Cantabile?
That's the one. Yeah. Is it A minor?
Yep.
Right, that's the one. It starts with some repeated A's in the left hand. And I was absolutely staggered by this. I said, "Good God, that's amazing. Who is Galuppi?" And I hadn't heard of him either. And she started.
Yeah.
That. So one can owe a great deal to students.
Yeah. The
student who Afghanistan, who I hope very much is doing okay at the moment, who introduced me to the Rameau, and Charlotte Hunter in Glasgow, who introduced me to Galuppi. Oddly enough, both those two pieces are in A minor, but I don't think that has any significance. But students can do a lot. One tries to help students, but students can help teachers as well. And
I have to say, Professor Seivewright, it's been just a tremendous conversation with you. I had a real pleasure to speak with you, and the time really flew. I just looked at the clock. I couldn't believe the time that just went by. It's almost like 2 hours.
Oh no, come on! Oh no, far from it. Because the point is that because I'm sparing your blushes, because I'm being interviewed by an extremely accomplished musician who is involved in music every day. No, and I wouldn't. Although I did know what Partimento was, I can tell you my knowledge of it has. I had to bone up on it in the last couple of days. I know. Here's and I saw the the interviews with the professors from the United States, and they knew everything about what was going on in this conservatory in Milan and this conservatory in Naples. I thought, well, wow, better do my stuff here. So no, but you've asked, and it's I can't tell you how pleased I am that you've got in touch with me, because the Partimento, the work you're doing with Partimento and the work I did with jazz piano students, it's very
there's an overlap there for sure.
Oh yeah, no, it's very, very similar. I was just thinking I should say there was a slight difference. It's not. You'll immediately see the difference, right? Because again, when I was professor of music at the Academy for the Performing Arts at the University of Trinidad. No, I get this right. Yeah, when I was professor of music at the Academy for the Performing Arts at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, professor of music at the Academy for the Performing Arts at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. These were jazz students. They'd really absorbed it. They knew it and stuff like that. Now in Glasgow, I was teaching students who might have had some knowledge of jazz, but not all that much. So I think that and that's really what your teaching is a bit like my teaching in Glasgow, because you're teaching students who are familiar with the 18th century idiom, but this is a new aspect of it.
Yeah.
And I don't doubt that they've got to study it and all the rest of it, but I don't doubt that they'll come back to you in a few years and say, yeah, that really freed up my classical piano playing. They just will, because it's a different thing, and it actually involves you in the process of composition.
Yep.
And so a huge congratulations on you for doing that. In fact, just tell me, just as we're winding up, tell me more about the Songbird Music Academy. How many students do you have? I'm sounding like the Russians now. What age are they? Do they do piano competitions when they're 6?
No. I mean, I originally was a jazz musician, and then I really fell in love. I always loved classical music, but I could not understand how they composed. It was different from jazz. There were similarities, but it was not exactly.
Hang on, were you jazz pianist, jazz composer?
I was a jazz guitarist, actually.
Guitarist, right? Yeah. Oh well, all right.
So I used to try and put.
You'll be unsurprised to know that in the field of jazz guitar, Joe Pass is my ultimate hero.
He's unbelievable. He's unbelievable.
He's the Oscar Peterson of the guitar, I think.
And I do believe they played together.
I do. I know. I've got it. Oh no, Joe Pass is absolutely. No words can describe it.
Yep. So
he just has to play a couple of. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you there.
No, that's right, and that's exactly how I just I had my experience back home, and I was kind of always curious.
Hang on, where's back home?
In Singapore, and I always wondered how how, there's Joe Pass and Oscar Peterson. But I just was, I think one thing, historical fact always very much impressed me, but made me question why things were the way they were today. And that was the fact that Bach and Mozart and Chopin and almost every single classical composer was a fabulous improviser. And
Indeed.
and then when I looked at my peers around me, and they were all wonderful pianists, they could all play quite well, but none of them could improvise and did not know how. Didn't have the foggiest on how to even begin. And I said, how can you be playing this incredibly complex music, but yet have no idea how it works or anything? And it just struck me as very
they wouldn't be able
strange.
to analyze them. Yeah.
It just struck me as very strange. And then on the flip side, those who do study composition today, sometimes the compositions can get very atonal and serialistic and very far removed from the 18th century.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other kettle of fish. But
It is, yeah, a massive one.
but to go back to the 18th century, I just was surprised that nobody could understand. People played Bach, played Mozart, played Chopin, but did not understand. Like if you asked to play in those styles, and they could not do it. Play like
No,
Bach.
I knew.
Yeah, and that always kind of bothered me, and I was always exploring, almost in a musicological sense, how they learned, and that led me down the rabbit hole, and eventually led me to Partimento, and figured bass and counterpoint and that sort of thing, and
Yeah.
that is quite at variance with, I guess you could say, modern analysis. But I'm still a student. I don't claim to know all the answers. I'm still very interested. That's why I interview great experts like you, very experienced, wonderful musicians, because I am still searching for the answers, and I'm still trying to figure out how this wonderful music that is Western classical music, how it came to be, how people write it, how people improvise it, and how they think
Yeah.
about it. And I do think actually the 18th century mind is different from the 20th and 21st century mind in conception
Of
of
course it is.
music. In conception, I think I don't know what it was. Maybe they were all Catholics and Lutherans, and maybe that influenced it in some way. And maybe there was I don't know, maybe the culture at the time, the 18th century culture, the Whigs. Maybe it was the Whigs, but they certainly thought differently. And I'm very interested in where it's different, and that margin of where it's different. And so
I know. Well,
exactly, that's why I look for the experts.
no, far from it. It's not surprising we've had a long conversation because you're in fact, I think you're more or less the only other individual I can think of. Well, I met you are effectively like me. You're a jazz musician turned classical musician. I mean, you remain a jazz musician. I think we're two of a very small number. But I think you're of course you're completely
Friedrich Golder,
right.
right? Isn't Friedrich Golder a classical?
Oh no, actually, yes, he taught himself jazz piano.
Oh,
I
right,
played a lot of it. In fact, I gave the British concert premiere of Goulder's Piano Concerto No. 2 for piano and big band in Ronnie Scott's in London,
Oh.
the great dance studio. And um, the but no, as I tell you, hang on, gosh, see a moment. What were we talking about? I was going to say.
We were
Oh
both.
yes, no.
Yeah.
This is what I have. This comes back to what I was saying. You say the 18th century, and even more the 16th century,
Yes.
and mind compared with the 21st and 20th century mind. Of course, you're completely right, and this is my interest in philosophy, and this comes back to my very considerable reservations about what they call historically informed performance. Because, as I say, I mean, this is what I said earlier, but it's even if you could reproduce exactly the sound that was made in the 16th or 18th century, the listening experience is going to be completely different because we've listened to
Audience.
Gershwin and read Chopin. Our whole mindset is different. And actually, I just have to say, not exactly a reservation, but I'd just say one thing that's important, I think, about Partimento. It sounds a bit like a reservation, but it isn't. Because all the composers you mentioned, Bach, Chopin, Mozart, everyone, as you say, they all improvised, and they were all great performers. One thing we have to note, however, is that they were all great performers on the piano or the keyboard instruments of that time. Now, it is not everyone who has something very valuable to offer as a composer who has a natural aptitude for keyboard instruments. For example, Nielsen, who's a complete piano music I recorded for Naxos as long ago as 1995. He was a violinist in the Philharmonic in Copenhagen. And so I think I would never say that something like Partimento would be an essential part of, I mean, I'm not a composer, so it's not for me to say what should constitute a composer's training. But clearly, not now in the 20th and 21st century, not all composers can be thought to be players of, keyboard instruments.
Yes.
And I think that's an important thing. So it is still possible for somebody to become a great composer who wouldn't have the faintest idea of Partimento.
Of course, absolutely.
I think it's important.
I think it died in the mid 19th century, so it kind of disappeared. And a lot of things Italian, unfortunately, were swept away with the tides of history. I guess at the turn.
Well, you'll be better informed on this than I am, but of course you're right. And Galuppi was the last great composer of the independent Venetian Republic before it was swallowed into Italy.
And he was so famous. Wasn't he extremely famous in his day?
Oh, yes, absolutely so. Yeah. I think one of the reasons that he became less famous was, of course, his greatest fame in his era, although very fine music, but not his greatest music, in my opinion. But his greatest fame in his era was as a composer of opera. And of course, particularly with the opera of those days, the operas are always going to go out of fashion more quickly than keyboard music or instrumental music, because they tend to have, some of Galuppi's operas satirize the politicians of the Venetian Republic.
Yep.
This sort of thing. They tend to be more
particular to that time period.
Yeah, exactly. No, actually, I remember, oddly enough, when I started recording Galuppi, my dad asked me, the organist, he said, why did Galuppi go out of fashion? And I said, well, what would your answer to that question be? And he said, because he was a composer of opera. And I said, you're exactly right. That was the reason. Opera composers do go out. And so, to use a rather silly linguistic cliche, the baby tends to go out with the bathwater. So people forgot about the Galuppi operas. Yeah. And unfortunately, the piano music went down. But just before we mind it, do tell me a bit more about Songbird, because how old are your students, and how many have you got? Do you have a big curriculum, or is it primarily instrumental training?
Oh, well, we try to implement the methods of the 18th century conservatories, as best we can. Of course, there's always a variety. Some popular music finds its way.
I'm aware you do that.
finds its way in. But the essential model is trying to follow how they might have learned. So the couple of things that I find important are singing, because I've always found even jazz musicians, bebop musicians, they sang, and I always thought that was a good part of a music education is just singing, and that's very Italian too. So that's an important part that I'm interested in. The next is practical keyboard harmony, which is Partimento. The Germans would say thorough bass. The French would say pas de chiffre. So
Yeah.
that is quite a bit at odds with analysis as you would see in terms of Roman numerals and functions and that sort of thing, because it's more of a Bach sort of, because Bach
Well, no,
himself,
it predates. Yeah.
he's more of a figured bass person. So it's more aligned with that ideology. And then finally, after that, the written counterpoint. So counterpoint essentially, more than chords, counterpoint really is the harmonic dictum that drives the curriculums. Essentially, like you mentioned, consonances, dissonances. So essentially, the layering of voices and things like the rule of the octave, things like bass motions, patterns, essentially that. And then how many thousands of varieties can you make out of each pattern? And then you can do like Rs combination. You can just mix and match the patterns, combine the patterns, very much like jazz. And for me,
So, and this is the whole curriculum of Songbird, is it?
We don't do atonal music, and I don't know anything about that. So I don't know anything about serialist music. So it goes as far as Debussy or late romantic music. That's as far as it would go.
No, it's very fascinating to me because, I mean, to put it in terms that everyone understand, I mean, I think it's absolutely fantastic that you appear to have established a unique conservatory along these lines.
Oh, it's not a conservatory. It's just like a school, but it's not that big.
Well, what age are the students mostly?
Mainly children. I mean, like between 5 to 14, and so young students, not late teenagers, not conservatory, not university.
I think it's a phenomenal achievement, really phenomenal. I can't tell you how impressed I am.
You managed to trying to be as different from the music board system as possible, if I could just sum it up that way.
Yeah, but I mean, what I think is absolutely amazing is that you've obviously established a financially viable institution on this unique basis, which, as you say, will be very, very unfamiliar to a lot of
Asia?
Parents of Singaporean children,
right,
who want them to pass. Sorry, it sounds a bit racist, but I don't mean that. I'm just talking about the culture, who want them to pass grade 1 and put the the trophy on the piano, sort of thing.
But I have to say, Professor Seivewright, I do sense that there is a change in the air.
I know. I think so too.
And I notice it, and they're not so opposed to it. And correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't there in the 20, 30 years ago almost a kind of unspoken hostility towards improvisation in classical music, or sort of it was not something that you did or ignored, or it was an amateur sort of venture? But that culture, that's changed. I think the perception around it has changed because historically we respect that the composers could improvise, and now why not follow them?
Yeah, no, it has changed, and I think it's very interesting that I think particularly it's changed in Asia. Actually,
yes.
it changed in Asia a lot. Now again, an Indian cellist who I know studied for a long time in. I'll tell you about this bloke because he's a very interesting chap, actually. Manav Naskar. He's a cellist. He was a student in Glasgow, and he was very good. He wasn't generally considered to be, one of the absolute best 2 or 3 cellists in the academy, but nonetheless, he played very well. Very well, and so anyway, I did a couple of recitals with him, and indeed I was one of the people who encouraged him in the academy. I'm sure he would say that, because I mean people recognized him, but you know how it is in a conservatory. There's always 1 or 2. They're the best, she's the best, he's the best. And sort of thing. And it's a bit like, as you say, composers being overshadowed by Bach or Mozart. and all that sort of thing. And he was sort of one. He was always, considered to be a good student, but not absolutely the best of the best sort of thing. Anyway, I thought he had something very very special to offer. So again, I appointed him as an instructor when I left to, and anyway, in due course, he went on. He did a master's degree in Texas, blah blah blah, and then he went back to India about I think having been away for I don't know about 15 years, and he said there's a huge change. There's people are so much better informed, and they know the rest.
Is similar to Singapore. They do have an exam culture there, or at least maybe it's not as strong now, but it's similar to Singapore. It used to have a very strong exam culture.
Yeah, but I think it's even stronger in Southeast Asia. Yeah, Singapore, Malaysia.
Oh, very strong.
all that sort of thing.
Yeah,
and it's I think it's all a bit of a
maybe it's changing, and actually that's a big reason why I do the show is just not to convince anyone, but just to show that there are alternatives to thinking in classical music. I mean, there's just a different way of thinking. That's all I really want to do is just and bring experts like yourself on and have this opportunity to just show that there's someone like Galuppi exists. You don't have to just like when you were taking questions and answers in what was some
Russia
in Russia, and none of them asked you any questions about music. I mean, just to offer. Maybe these questions don't even exist in their mind, and maybe it's a good thing to just even show them that maybe that you can think in music in a different way. And certainly for me in my own development, I definitely benefited a lot from getting great perspectives from great experts, and that really has shaped the. I think everyone should be exposed to great experts talking about music. So to that end, that's why I have people like you on.
Oh no, not at all. You know far more about Partimento than I do, ever will. No, but I think it's great. It is a marvelous thing to have established.
So what should we? So Professor Seivewright, final thoughts before we wrap up. What would you
I say final thoughts?
Final thoughts, and please also plug your next upcoming projects and concerts. I'd love to tell my audience about the upcoming things you have lined up for the rest of the year.
I will do, but I tell you, here you are. You can't talk to classical concert pianists without getting this in. Here's the final thing. I take you have a performance. I take it that you have a performance space at Songbird.
No, we'd have to rent something. We'd have to rent it out.
All right,
a real guerrilla operation.
I was going to say I want to come and play some Galuppi. And
well, you're certainly invited. We'd figure something out.
I'll keep you to that. Actually, my current project, I'm on something. Well, people would say different from Galuppi. I didn't really see it as different, but I mean, from a different period of music. There's a long story behind this one. Another name which I think will probably be unfamiliar to in Singapore, and indeed is probably unfamiliar to a large number of people in the United Kingdom now, is the English composer Cornelius Cardew, who was born in 1936, and he died at the age of 45, unfortunately, after being run over by a car in London in 1981. I'll come back to Cornelius Cardew's death in a moment. But in his time, there were several things about Cornelius Cardew. He was quite a famous chap. You get these things up straight away. In the late 1960s, he ran a lot of what was called at that time experimental music concerts, which included a good deal of improvisation. And all that type, and using electronic instruments, sound amplification, and all that sort of thing. A tiny little bit, but not really. I mean, it was classical music, but it was sort of crossover with the rock world. And he was also rather in the spirit of some people at that time. He was very iconoclastic generally. That he actually came from quite a wealthy family, and he'd been a chorister at Canterbury Cathedral. He'd been to a very well-known English public school, and all the rest of it. And he'd had a lot of advantages in life, but he became a very dedicated communist, which I'm certainly not. I'm very much conservative, but I find a lot of communists. There's fantastic repertoire of music written by communists. It doesn't. It really is. I find they all seem to be great composers.
I believe Wagner was a left-wing revolutionary, I think.
Well, I don't know about that. Not in some ways, but anyway, the Cardew, and of course, he was active, very strongly active in the 1960s, the iconoclastic 1960s, and many people would say he is very much a product of that era, really. And of course, that was at the height of the Cold War, the Vietnam War, and all the rest of it. And so he was very dead communist. The reason he died at the age of 45, he was run over by a car near his home in London. Oof. And there are many theories about this. There's quite a lot on the internet about it. And many people believe that he was deliberately killed by the height of the Cold War, anti-communism, the Vietnam War, fear of communism spreading in Asia. I mean, you're a young chap. I actually remember that era. I was born in 1954. And a lot of people, including many of his friends, believe that he was assassinated by the British establishment. Now, that has never been proved. But what I can say, I'm a great believer in all these conspiracy theories, and we live in such a conspiracy theory age. I think one must separate.
What do they say about conspiracy theories? They're just 5 years before fact.
Yeah. Well, it's like Yes Minister being a documentary, isn't it? Not a comedy. And anyway, all these conspiracy theories about the COVID pandemic and all that. Some of them, how we're all going to be injected with Bill Gates microchips. So I think some of them go a little bit far. But anyway, but the fact is that no one was ever apprehended by the police in connection with Cardew's death. Although it was on a busy London street, it was quite late at night, about 11 o'clock. But nonetheless, it was residential era. No witnesses, nobody saw it, no nothing. And the belief, certainly amongst many people who were very friendly at Cardew with this event, the rumor, actually I shouldn't say rumor, but the possibility that he was assassinated by the British establishment at that time it's never been proved, but it's still a theory that is quite current. Now,
JFK, no one really knows.
Yeah, I'd say no, nobody knows with JFK. I think there's slightly more evidence in the case of Cornelius Cardew that, the truth is that I think it has been established that the police did not make any great efforts to solve this. I think that much is fair to say. I don't want to, to slander the police, but I think that is established that no big efforts were made. I think that's about as much as one could say at the moment. Anyway, I'm certainly not a communist, very much conservative, but as you can see, I have performed in Afghanistan, in the Donetsk People's Republic, and being a professional music performer is not a career for timid people, and I'm a firm believer in playing in, one should develop one's nerve, one should play in war zones and all the rest of it, as I have. Afghanistan, Donetsk People's Republic, and many other places. And I thought, well, I don't think many Western musicians have played in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, widely referred to as North Korea.
How is that?
Well, no, I haven't yet.
Oh, okay.
I thought, well, no, nobody has done it. Mm-hmm. Interesting, and I have got a very adventurous temperament and a good nerve, and I thought, I'll just find out, see. Now, you can find out, they're often talked about. They don't accept the term North Korea. They say that they are the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and they believe South Korea is occupied, largely by the American military. Yes, I must say, I don't want to get too political, but I mean, Joe Biden saying we can't keep soldiers in Afghanistan forever. Well, I mean, there have been 30,000 soldiers in South Korea, United States soldiers in South Korea, for 3/4 of a century.
Around the world,
it's a complete lie. You could keep as many soldiers in Afghanistan as they will welcome, and I'm sure they would welcome a great many. But anyway, we don't want to get onto straight politics. But these days you can find out anything, and the orchestra in the National Symphony Orchestra, as it's now called, in Pyongyang, keeps changing its name for some reason. It's now the National Symphony Orchestra. They are an absolutely marvelous orchestra. I'm not exaggerating at all when I say they're on a technical level with the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, the best. They are absolutely stunning. And they particular, they're all good, and a lot of the musicians have studied in Russia and China, and the string players are marvelous. But particularly, they have some extraordinary things. Their brass playing is absolutely phenomenal. The beauty of tone and all that, and they seem to have made a particular thing of producing an absolutely phenomenal number of top class French horn players. And so, and I thought, oh, wait a minute, this is interesting. Not everything can be bad about the Democratic People's Republic of Korea if they can produce a symphony orchestra like that. Anyway, I got more and more interested in this, and I joined an organization which is not a political organization, but it's called the Korean Friendship Association. So, a worldwide organization, and it is simply to establish better relations with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. It's not, nobody is saying that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is paradise. It's not an organization that is dedicated to establishing a similar political, situation in other countries or anything like that. It's simply a friendship organization to establish truth and we're always hearing rumors that the president of DPRK, as they always refer to it, is about to die and so on. Anyway, turns up, a couple of years later in perfect health. There is undoubtedly a lot of very, very silly and completely false propaganda about the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. So anyway, through that,
people are killed with an aircraft carrier gun and also killed by dogs or something.
Well, anyway, it's a great source of rather ridiculous, implausible news, which is frequently printed in some of the less considered newspapers, shall we say. And anyway, but through that, I met another composer called Michael Chant, who is the president of a similar organization called Friends of Korea. And as people always say, it's like what's the difference between the Judean People's Republic and the People's Republic of Judea, sort of thing, all the communist groups, they're with a new communist party, with a revised communist party, Marxist, tiny little splinter groups. But anyway, no, the Korean Friends of Korea and Korean Friendship Association both very much have the same idea of establishing and hopefully establishing cultural exchange and so on. So I'm hoping to go and play in the Democratic Republic of Korea, and plans are quite well advanced. However, this comes back to Cornelius Cardew, because the president of Friends of Korea, the other organization, is a composer called Michael Chant, a very fine composer, who was a close associate of Cornelius Cardew in the 1960s and worked with Carnegie. He's a bit older. Michael was born, I think, in 1945. And anyway, as a result of this, Michael Chant has written, and that was the piece I showed you that I've been working on.
Right.
That's his handwritten score. And he's written an absolutely fabulously good. It really is fabulously good. I've had about 20 or 30 works written for me, all by fabulously gifted composers. But this really is something exceptional, the Michael Chant Piano Sonata. And he's written for this, and my current project, my next thing, I'm giving this at the world premiere in a small town called Bells Hill, which is very near Glasgow, about 20 miles from my home, in 2 weeks on Thursday. And I'm recording the Michael Chant Piano Sonata, and also a work by Cornelius Cardew. People always, it's like, I don't have a television receiving set, but all these actresses go and plug their book, I happen to have my book to hand. I happen to have the Cornelius Cardew Vietnam Sonata to hand, simply because I've been practicing it. So it lives by my piano and by my armchair. And there you are, Cornelius Cardew Vietnam Sonata. And it was written after the conclusion of the Vietnam War. It includes Vietnamese folk music. It includes, and of course, being a communist, he welcomed the outcome, and includes. So my current project is I'm working on the Cornelius Cardew Vietnam Sonata and the Michael Chant Piano Sonata, and 2 shorter works by another very excellent composer who is associated with Cardew and Michael Chant, called Hugh Shrapnel. Again, yes, I happen to have it here. Yes, there we are. That's Hugh Shrapnel, and the great name for a communist, isn't it? Shrapnel. But anyway, no, I thought actually they both got good names. Hugh Shrapnel is a great communist, and Michael Chant, Chant, is an organist. Great name, Mr. Chant, the organist, Mr. Shrapnel, the communist. They're marvelous. Anyway, for that, they're quite used to. They're both very good-humored people. They're quite used to send-ups about that. Anyway, this is all very wonderful music, and I'm recording I'm putting the Cornelius Cardew Vietnam Sonata and the Michael Chant Piano Sonata and the Hugh Shrapnel works. And in a little bit later in the autumn, I shall be recording those for a new CD for the Divine Art Recordings Group. Stephen Sutton, the Chief Executive Officer of the Divine Art Recordings Group, as you know, he has very adventurous. And in fact, actually, I have to say, I'm quite pleased about this. One does not want to blow one's own trumpet, but yes, as a matter of fact, the scheduled, except where it's justified, the scheduled release date of this new Cornelius Cardew and Michael Chant CD is the 1st of January. It's difficult to have absolute deadlines at the moment, yes, because if there's another, lockdown, but the schedule is New Year's Day, 2022, and the scheduled release date of the Cornelius Cardew and Michael Chant and Hugh Shrapnel CD it's the same date. With our plan is to release that CD on the same day as my CD of the Jazz Bach Goldberg variations.
Oh,
And
wow.
I think I can say without prediction that there is no other pianist who has issued a CD of Goldberg variations and Cornelius Cardew's Vietnam Sonata on the same day. So that's not blowing my own trumpet. It's just a fact, and I don't think So I'm hoping that will happen.
Very well. That's wonderful. So looking forward to it, Professor Seivewright. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope you had a good time on the program. And thank you so much. I think, what a conversation. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, the point is that we have such similar interests.
Yeah.
We're both jazz musicians who have become classical musicians, although we also remain jazz musicians. We both have a huge interest in the 18th century. No, I definitely, I'm going to, definitely want to do that. I love Asia, and I shall be pressing you to come and perform.
Yes, hopefully when things open up, I definitely would love to meet in person, and we can organize something.
Yeah, we will organize something. Maybe we can have some. We could get a unique concert. We could be the only two people who could do this. We could have Partimento realization. We could have Galuppi, and we could have combined guitar and piano jazz.
That would be wonderful.
Right. We would be. I think we would be two of the very few people, very few people who could offer that particular concert. Wonderful. Anyway, just as a matter of interest, how are you with Singapore and lockdown? So we're much more freed up much better.
Well, recently we've stepped away from a heightened alert, so they've taken away the temperature checks at the entrances of malls and places. So there are no more temperature checks, but you do have to scan in, and I do believe there has been a rise of cases they've mentioned in the news. So we'll see. I remain optimistic. I really hope things open up and we can get back to normal in the future.
Yeah, I think so. Well, we can now have concerts and so on. I have the last time I performed a concert to a live audience. Done a few online things, but the last time I performed a concert to a live audience was the 15th of February 2020. Oh. So I'm very much looking forward to playing again in a couple of weeks.
That would be wonderful. Well, okay. Thank you, Professor Seivewright. It's been an absolute pleasure. Stay on the line. We'll chat after we go off the air. But for now, take care. Thanks for being on the show.
All right. Okay, I'll stay on.
Oh, okay. Well, that was. Can we do that goodbye one more time? So I'll cut it in.
What do you want? You want to do a farewell?
Yeah, do a farewell. So, all right, Professor Seivewright. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Bye now.
Right. No, thanks very much. It's been fantastically interesting for me, and congratulations on all the superb work you're doing, which I think will be. There's no question. Many other people will take it up, but you are a unique organization modeled on the 18th century Italian conservatoires. That's fantastic.